Darian Payne has a camera on. Would you like to share where you are? You'd have to
Hi.
unmute yourself. Hi.
Hi, I'm Darian. I'm Bob T is my husband. We're in Falls City, Washington. We've been here 10 years. Always more to learn, never enough time. We've been recently harvesting apples and dry beans and corn, and we've had a lot of rain, so it's been a mad rush.
Just as a service announcement for people, and if you have two people who are in Zoom at the same time and you both are hearing the talk, it helps if one person turns down the volume on their thing.
Oh, yes.
Just for the feedback.
Apologies for
No,
that.
but you're good. People may not be used to that. So thank you for sharing, Darian.
Yeah, any other people? I don't see anyone else with their camera on. But if anyone else would like to share, now's your time. The next things on the evening are David Algren is going to speak to social permaculture. David Stein is going to do a slideshow of he took a sabbatical from the board for maybe 9 months or so and went around India and different parts and visited all these cool farms and people and projects and is going to do a slideshow. And then I believe we have music. So that's what's coming up. And David's next, unless anyone else wants to share their name and their intention for the weekend. All right.
Thanks, Shaylee.
David Algren.
Everybody, can you hear me all right? Everyone good?
For sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Shaylee, for hosting this. And it was really good to see everyone. There's just so many names that showed up. Like, I had no idea Abby was going to show up. And she's actually one person on my list I have to thank for some of the things I'm going to share today. As we start, I actually want to take some time of reverence to the topic we're going to discuss. Also, when we do an opening circle, a lot of times we bring someone who can bring a perspective of a time of recognizing where we are with the land. And today we're going to be talking about the human landscape. And whether it's the human landscape or the trees and the plants and the dirt, I actually would like to start today stopping at the edge of the forest and realizing our place. Because that, I think, is the biggest key to us seeing the perspective of where we need to go as humans in our human landscape and in the landscape of restoring the land and all the exciting things. But before I get super excited, I've been known to get super animated. And I've also been told I've taught this class in 4-hour, 8-hour, 2-session 8 hours, not 8 hours straight. I've taught it at the Northwest Permaculture Convergence and around the world. And from it, each time I get humbled. And so I first want to start out by saying that I'm open to criticism because I'm not coming as a person who has it all. I am coming as a person who has focused a huge amount of my research and my time. I've committed half of my permaculture research, half of my permaculture teaching, and half of my permaculture work to human relations. And I'll get to that on why. But I want us to stop. And as I do this, I want to first invite everyone to stop and think about a topic that you personally face that's really important to you. I'm gonna give you some examples of what those are, and I actually took these from the last few hours of discussion. But I want you to maybe put in the chat just one word only, or maybe it's 2 words that describe something. Something that you find that you struggle with. You might struggle with it because it's something that's been put on you. Or maybe it's something that you struggle in putting on someone else or putting on the land. Or maybe it's both. So I want to cover some of... An example? Totally. And that's my list here. And these are examples of things that you guys have brought up already. In the opening circle, we had decolonization. We had community. And some of these things can be exciting things, like, you know, things we're joyful about, but they're also things that we have intention of. Safety, harmony, family, home, position, passing something down, growing old, collective ownership, honoring the past, conflict, diversity of race, age, personality. Those are all things I would put in their words that I normally add as like seed words, is like shame, guilt, aggression, anger, punishment, discipline. They're all things that, at least for me, are things that that I feel like within our culture are what I call degenerative. Things that need a design, that things that we, as people who are stopping at the edge of the forest, and I'll explain what I mean by edge of the forest soon, when we stop. And in permaculture, our first thing we do is we stop and we observe. And so as these words are coming through, I encourage you all to read them. And as I mentioned before, I normally teach this in a many-hour session, so we got 30 minutes. But in this process, I want us to realize the magnitude of what we're discussing. I also want to tell you that I'm not coming here to tell you, oh, David has these solutions. I want to tell you the pathway that I've seen that has been handed to me by many people. And some of these people are like Shaylee, you know, I'm like, she's on this screen over on this side. Shaylee. And some of these people are my mother. My mother died when I was 13 years old, and I became an orphan. And I became an orphan on the island of Guam in Southeast Asia, where the white person came and took away all the land. The Japanese came and took it from the white person. And then the white person came and liberated people. And, you know, the US government probably watches too many Disney movies, and when they liberate someone, then they own them. And so I was born on an island, on a goat farm, on an island where America owned the land and the people, and still to this day treats them as though they're owned. And as some of us here have experienced that, I grew up as the color of the oppressor. And when I became an orphan, I was put in a prison for 1.5 years of my life. And I had all of my rights taken from me. And then I appealed to the US government to rescue me after 1.5 years. And at 16 years old, I came to America. And going back, I actually was an elderly gentleman as a child that taught me to plant a food forest. So I planted a food forest as a kid. Went to the United States, started a software development company, succeeded, went to the university, went to Washington, and wrote policy to help foster children. And then I went back to the island of Guam to sell them a software. I always say I have a degree in capitalism, so it gives me opportunity to dismantle capitalism. So I went back to the island, and on that island, I went back to the food forest I planted. And where there was no topsoil when I was a kid on this piece of land, my rental car got stuck in topsoil. I couldn't get down to the limestone because I also filled the back of my rental car with fruit and vegetables. And I saw the symbiotic relationship from what the planting on a destroyed piece of land can look like. And then a portion of a lifetime passes. And then now we have this amazing piece of land that's not really even being tended, but dripping with fruits and vegetables. And from there, I was like, this is bigger than anything I could ever do in my life. And whoever taught this person how to teach me, I want to meet this person. So I got mentored by Jeff Lawton, went back to the Oklahoma and sold half my software development company, bought my first piece of land, and started permaculture design, and got mentored by Jeff Lawton, sold my 13 acres, bought 120 acres, started research. And I started research on restoring land, just like I did as a kid. And I succeeded at developing methods in a deciduous forest and restoring land back to symbiosis by using the power of nature. I want to keep this in mind in permaculture. We can just try. This is true in social permaculture too. Is we could try all we want, but unless we sometimes stop and see what the true nature wants to do and join in that in harmony, then like one piece of energy and one unit of soil become like 100 units of food. Just a little bit of time and observation. And it's a joy. So where this turns into social permaculture, I went to the Northwest, and people liked what I did because it's deciduous forest, and I had lines of people to hire me, and I had people who wanted to learn from my methods. And I was asked to be the keynote speaker of the Northwest Permaculture Convergence a few years ago. And I have lots of work. But I went to the Northwest and did a huge earthworks project. And some people here today were at that earthworks project. And I got an idea that there was a lot more than just this earthworks project, but there was a lack of harmony between certain people. And when I did that earthworks project, we did huge amounts of regeneration of the land, and we've set in stone like some amazing changes to this beautiful piece of land. And I won't even say where it is because I don't want to connect people, because it doesn't really matter who these people are. And I'm not shaming anyone. I'm not more or less shaming myself, because me as a permaculture designer came into this design with lots of pride. And lots of like, I can fix this, I can make this happen. And yes, we got an excavator out, and yes, we planted a lot of trees. And yes, I taught the landowner and a bunch of people how to soak, store, and spread water, which is kind of like my specialty. But it wasn't long after we put in that earthworks project that the land went into foreclosure. And I would call that my biggest failure as a permaculture designer. And that was a failure because I saw, but I didn't take action. I didn't observe and act based on what I saw of more stopping and observing the human landscape before we move forward. Because sometimes when we do a disturbance like earthworks or a disturbance like planting, we can actually exert energy that gets destroyed. If the humans, which are a foundation of this, or we are making a foundation by our choices and trying to restore the land quicker than nature would do by itself, because we're an element of nature, it failed. And so that land is no longer in the hands of people that tend it and bring it into that abundance. From that point, I really went into a point, I talked to mentors and such, and I was really heartbroken. I was like, oh, this is my poster child. This is my pride. This is my like big truck. I make that analogy, especially in Oklahoma, men buy big trucks. And I had to really stop and say that I failed. So in that, I decided to commit from now forward. I'm going to commit half of my time in permaculture to social issues. And so the first time at the Northwest Permaculture Convergence, I think 2 years ago, I taught, I just said permaculture of human relations, and I made a circle. And we sat around and talked. And some of you were in this discussion. And there was really beautiful things discussed, and it was a little messy. And then afterwards, there was even messier discussions. And at the campfire before, there was some messy discussions that literally had me take my notes that I was planning to teach, you know, like I'm a teacher. I put them in the fire because I realized that I really just needed to stop and facilitate a circle. So in that, most of the time when I'm teaching this class, it's longer and we have a circle of people and we discuss some of these specific things. And I'm willing to either after, later on, in person, maybe facilitate a different class. And I also will travel anywhere in the world to facilitate human relations for people I think who are in symbiosis with me. I want to start out in some of my processes and some of the things I've observed. But before that, I have a note here. I said, my mother, Shay Lee, I was like, just Shay Lee. Shay Lee's an example of some like emergent design. Like I remember going to her place and the way she parents, you know, I have three children I tend to, and I don't use possessive words. They are descendants of myself. but they're not my children. They're their own. And sovereignty is a big element of, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So Shaylee, I really appreciate you, Shaylee, and also appreciate doing work with people. And just dancing in life with people, you learn a lot. So you're right after my mother, Shaylee. Pat Rasmussen has been a mentor of mine, and seeing how she's committed so much of her life. And I've learned a lot from her about aging. Abby is a good friend who just spoke, and just seeing her like in different scenarios and just different environments. We were at Shaylee's for a camp out. I spent some time at Afrovetcha with her, and just like sitting and discussing, or taking a phone call, you know, and talking about social issues. These people are great. Jeff Lawton is a student of Bill Mollison, the coiner of permaculture, has been a really huge influence in me and showing me some of these pathways and showing me nature that's speaking to me in the social realm. So as we move forward, I want to cover the 3 ethics of permaculture. And for the permaculture purists here, you're gonna be like, fraud. I've kind of changed them a little bit. But I would say this is, when I finish writing a book, this will be what I would call the permaculture of human relations ethics. And the first ethic is care for yourself. And that's knowing yourself, stopping and observing yourself. And then this is still in the first ethic. It's realizing that that's a role for everyone around us. And we're to champion that role. So it's care for the selves, you know, of the ones around us. And when we realize the honor and importance of us caring for ourselves, we start to realize the value of the other people around us. We honor them with the same honor we honor ourselves. So when we do that, after we get that all done, then we can care for the earth and everything around it, all the other selves like the trees and the birds and the fish. Because now we're in harmony. Now we can create community. And then just like Abby was talking, now we are coming together. So what next? So what about the land? What about ownership? What about possession? What about service? What about responsibility to the planet? I'm listing off some of the things people are posting here. What about consequences? What about the things that plagued us from our path that we found peace on, but how do we not pass those on to the next generation? So that would be care for the earth. And then the third one is sharing the surplus. And that is a really beautiful thing. And let me go back to my permaculture farm, because, you know, back before I jumped into social permaculture, I've always been a geek of social and like anthropology and such, but I didn't really integrate it into my permaculture as depthly and as so important as I do now. As whenever I started my research, you know, Jeff Lawton said, when you start to see nature finding harmony where you're not working anymore, you have what we call an exponential growth curve. It's where like things happen. And for those people that are new to permaculture, look for this. It's the exciting point in permaculture when we start to see growth and changes, and before long, it like the curve starts to rise in a huge way. I'm gonna draw in the back because this is the only thing I'm gonna draw today. I'm gonna draw an exponential growth curve, and that just shoots up to the stars. But sometimes this line goes, the flat line behind me here, that flat line is a long line. And an exponential growth curve is that abundance. So in permaculture, Jeff said, you know what, if we don't see abundance, you're failing, or you just need to wait a little longer. But we constantly in permaculture, we have a feedback loop. And that's why we build relations with people that have a feedback loop. And it's not just like, hey, you know, I'm open for a feedback loop. It's no, we create those feedback loops. We create systems. I'm gonna move over to the right here. We create systems that find that harmony, and we continue to recreate. And Shaylee always says this, it's like emergent design. And then like Abby and Shaylee are very similar in some ways. They just jump in. I'm a little bit more of a planner, but I realize that I failed at this a lot in in some areas that I don't feel super confident in, I do what I call leaving my trees in the pots. And I like to say that in the past 6 months, I've realized one of my biggest failures is leaving in the pots. I'll just take that analogy of leaving the trees in the pots. There's so many people who buy trees. I'm sure there's been people out there. Shaylee, I'm sure you've bought some trees. You're like, oh, these are a good deal on trees. And then you just don't get them in the ground, you know? It's like a permaculture ultimate failure. I don't know if everyone else fails to that, but like I buy more trees than I have time to plant. And sometimes I also meet some people who I'm consulting and they bought a bunch of trees and they're just waiting for the perfect place to place them. And in the social realm, I've done that. I've been sitting here with some of the things that have happened in our world. And I've been facing some of my own, but it's not an excuse that my mouth has been shut. There hasn't been a YouTube video from me about my perspective because I've had fear. I've had realizations of my place in this. And so I would have to say I'm struggling in that and knowing when and where to speak. But I'm inspired by so many, and there was a board meeting that, and I shared this, and I was called out by a dear sister and said, David, what you just said is a good start. And I'm also thankful for Shaylee, who jumped in and published a video on her thoughts. But that's like an unplanted pot, unplanted tree. It's like you have something to plant. You might not know the perfect place, but we have to realize we have this opportunity and we can go ahead and place that tree with the humility that we might be wrong. And so that comes from a place, so when we're entering the forest, and I told you I'd tell you guys earlier about standing on the edge of the forest. And I got to take you back to the island of Guam and the culture in which I was created. And I love studying anthropology and religions and all these things. And someone once told me, I don't know who it was, they said, religion is culture externalized. And so we're permaculture, right? And so sometimes if you like follow that back, you realize that sometimes the religions can speak to the culture that was created. It was the culture externalized. And so we go back to the religion of the people of Guam, and they believed in kind of little gnomes. They're these little guys they call the Tatamona. And they're really fun. They don't kill people, they just pinch people. And so you go into the forest and the cultural, you'll see, if you ever go to the island of Guam or the Marianas Islands, Guam is in Southeast Asia and in the northern Marianas Islands. And if you ever go there and you see a local person walk to the edge of the forest, they always say, they speak to the spirits and they say, hey, I'm here. This is my intentions. May I enter? And inside, it's not like these people truly believe that there's really these little spirits. It's just this culture of honoring the forest and honoring the things in it. They don't pee on the tree without asking the Tatamona. They don't walk into the forest. They don't plant a tree. They don't cut down a tree. They don't build a house. They don't do really anything that has to do with nature. Before they walk into the water, they'll ask the Tatamona. Before they go fishing, they'll talk to the Tatamona. And so in a lot of ways, this stopping and observing the land was influenced in my childhood by the culture around me that I needed to always stop and ask. And it was an inner asking. And it's us being, and that comes from being honest with ourselves. And if we can't be honest with ourselves, if we have so much pride, then we turn out doing projects like I did on the Olympic Peninsula that turn out being foreclosed on or sold and never continued. And so I want to ask us here is like, in what place do we have pride? What place do we have a degenerative nature that we haven't stopped and asked for? And so when we do that, when all this happens, then we turn around and we can start to ask the questions about decolonization. We can ask the questions, and I'm going to pull up some of these words people put. We can ask the questions of how we deal with consequences and shame and mindfulness. a sense of entitlement, and we process that within ourselves. And I think that first starts with humility and stopping. But from that, I would say from that comes all of these new patterns. So when we observe nature and nature within ourselves, we observe patterns. So as I've facilitated circles through with other people, I've created little exercises. And if you all were here, we're sitting around a fire or at a convergence coming soon in the years to come, I'll have a circle and you can join the circle. And it will just be that. It will just be a circle of people who will stop and we'll talk about some things. And then I'll share some exercises that will bring some tears and bring some laughter and hopefully bring us a feedback loop. Hopefully also seed in me new things, because I'm only as good as the people around me that have shared me some of these things. But in my time remaining, which I want to take a look at my time to make sure that I know how much time I have to go. I'm till 8:20. Oh, by the way, I'm on Florida time. I'm in Florida, so it's 11:21. So how much time do I have? Am I totally done on time? Do I have time for one? I'm done at time. Should I stop? I don't hear you, Shaylee. 5 minutes. Okay, I want to do something. I want to do something I've not shared with anyone. I want to share with you my theory. I want to share with you my theory on where I, as a human, tall white male, feel like I need to be in our culture. And this is me being vulnerable for a second. So whenever I'm dealing with any social thing, we turn to nature as our guide. And so in nature, and so on the issue of the fact that I'm a white male who was given opportunity and got into college easily and was given jobs. And the only time I think I've been looked down on is when I was young, trying to get into business meetings, or when I was on the island of Guam and I was white, you know, but since then, really, opportunities just flow. And so where's my place in this whole picture of the fact that I'm advantaged and other people are disadvantaged? And I'm really coming from, I want you to know, everyone here, that I'm coming from a place of asking this question. But this is an idea I have as a human. And I hope if there's anyone here who feels like they're an advantaged person, that maybe they can hear. And if you're a disadvantaged person, please tell me if there's any other ideas. Add to my analogy. I love it. So this is going to be me. So in here, I'm a really good artist, by the way, and especially when the marker doesn't work. It's going to be a blue tree, I think, if the blue marker works. Okay. So I'm going to create a tree here. This tree represents me. And it's a deciduous tree. So I was about to make a palm tree for some reason, but you know, it's a deciduous tree. We got branches, and we got higher branches and lower branches. This is the tree. And underneath this tree came up really strong. It had a lot of resources. This tree came up super strong. And it actually kept this little seedling from getting sunlight. Here's the sun coming in here, you know, sunlight. The sunlight shining in. And it also took a lot of the moisture that fell, you know, and it wasn't really able to do much. This tree over time took a lot of resources and took advantage of the things that were readily available to it. And this tree just kind of became spindly and really didn't have the things it needed, a few little branches. And this tree might be a nitrogen fixator because they can move quickly. So me as a tree, if I realize the place of this tree, I have so much here, so much growth, so much happening. My argument is that we need to coppice ourselves. We as we as people who have had roots that are very strong, very resourced. I'm not saying that I'm an advocate or not an advocate for us coppicing other trees, but I'm an advocate for me coppicing. And maybe I have just like some random branches here and I'm cut myself really low. But look at all that huge growth that I cut off. That can go here to a soil in our culture that is hugely, hugely desertified. It's a monoculture of nast. And it makes it really hard for this tree to even get started. And this tree could even be older than me, but I still can be bigger because I'm a nitrogen fixator. I'm one of those fast growing invasive species called the tall white male or something else. You put your own words into it. So I'm an advocate for coppicing, and I can discuss a while, and maybe it's another topic for another class, is what does it look like for us to coppice ourselves and put the chop and drop in permaculture? There's a lot of new permaculture people. I'm excited about you guys here. Permaculture Basics tomorrow, a little plug for my class tomorrow, is we chop and we drop all these nutrients. And also, another thing that happens with a nitrogen fixator is when you chop these, the nodules of nitrogen underground release the nitrogen for this little tree to go. And I would argue that because the forest has been shaded by this tree, it needs this tree. And in the same way, we need some of the massive diversity and knowledge and resources and abundance that can come when you have diversity in a forest. So from that comes a community of people and a community of trees. And I'm gonna still grow more branches. Coppicing doesn't always kill. I'm gonna still grow. And you know what? When I coppice and this tree, symbiosis, I potentially can grow more food for the world. And I can grow more food. That tree itself can grow more food. So that is my theory in a little nutshell. And I can expound upon it in any way. But I'm thankful to take this opportunity. And I open myself up for criticism. And this is an idea, not a statement. And I'm thankful. Thank you.
Thank you. I like how it toning back into some of the things that we learned from the garden. Like how even those things that might seem, it's like the problem is the solution. And even the things that can be hard, like the growth in the dominant species, if it can self-regulate and accept feedback, those are permaculture design principles, and choose to prune that radical growth, there's that growing space gets to be occupied by other life forms. And so good to learn that. And to kind of hold space for those plants that are growing in the understory and want to have a chance to grow. So thank you, David, for sharing.
You're welcome. That. And I just want to open the door for anyone, anywhere in the world, if you're interested in having a discussion or having me come and do a healing circle. I do it with men only sometimes, and I do it with community as a whole. And I love facilitating discussion in a non-hierarchical scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some suggestions in the chat for different social permaculture books, and I'm copying all the chat. It's linked in the Dropbox somewhere, and I'm putting it in our Slack group in a channel just for the chat if you want to find those notes later.
That's awesome. And I'm going to probably open up a social permaculture Slack group if there's not already one set up. And I will put in a list of books, which I normally show, that a lot of my concepts were seeded from. And I'm so thankful for the authors of the past that have helped me.
Cool. Well, thank you. And I appreciate I like how it all comes back to the garden in so many ways. There's so many things we can learn when we just meditate on nature. And now I think it'll be a really fun